The dust swirled around Samuel Crawford's boots as he stepped between the raised rifle and the trembling Apache boy. The year was 1882, and in the unforgiving landscape of Arizona Territory, mercy was a luxury few could afford. What happened next would echo across the mesas and valleys, transforming a simple act of compassion into a legend that would reshape the destiny of an entire region. This is the story of how one man's conscience ignited a chain of events that nobody, not the settlers, not the cavalry, not even the Apache themselves, could have predicted. Subscribe and hit the bell icon to discover how a split-second decision changed the fate of hundreds, and stay until the end to witness the most powerful scene ever captured in the American West. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Copper Ridge, Arizona Territory, as Samuel Crawford loaded supplies into his weathered wagon. The town buzzed with an electric tension that made the hairs on his weathered neck stand on end. Word had spread like wildfire. Captain Morrison's cavalry unit had captured an Apache brave caught stealing cattle from the Peterson Ranch. Samuel had seen enough violence in his 43 years. The Civil War had taken his brother, and the harsh frontier had claimed his wife to fever 3 winters past. Now all he wanted was to work his modest ranch in peace, raising cattle and trying to forget the ghosts that haunted his dreams. "Crawford!" Captain Morrison's voice cut through the morning air like a cavalry saber. The officer strode toward him, his blue uniform crisp despite the desert heat, his hand resting casually on his sidearm. Behind him, a crowd of townspeople gathered, their faces showing a mixture of excitement and bloodlust that made Samuel's stomach churn. "Captain?" Samuel nodded, not pausing in his loading. He'd learned long ago that showing fear to men like Morrison only invited trouble. "You're just in time for some frontier justice," Morrison announced, his voice carrying across the street. "We caught ourselves a red-skinned cattle thief. Time to teach these savages what happens when they mess with white man's property." Samuel's hands stilled on the flour sack he was lifting. Through the crowd, he caught sight of the prisoner. Not a man at all, but a boy, maybe 14 years old, with defiant dark eyes that reminded Samuel painfully of his own son, buried these past 5 years beside his mother. The boy's hands were bound behind his back, his clothes torn and dusty from capture. Blood trickled from a cut on his lip, but his chin was raised proudly, showing no fear despite the hostile crowd surrounding him. There was something in those young eyes, not the wild desperation of a cornered animal, but the quiet dignity of someone who had accepted his fate. "Mighty young for a cattle rustler," Samuel observed quietly, but his words carried in the desert stillness. Morrison's laugh was harsh and cold. "Old enough to steal, old enough to hang. That's frontier law, Crawford. Thought you of all people would understand that, what with the Indians killing your boy." The words hit Samuel like a physical blow, but he kept his expression neutral. The town fell silent, waiting to see how he would react. Everyone knew the story, how Samuel's 6-year-old son had been killed during an Apache raid 5 years earlier. Most expected him to cheer the loudest for the boy's execution. "My son died of pneumonia, Morrison," Samuel said evenly. "You're thinking of the Miller family." The captain's face flushed red at the correction, but he pressed on. "Well, whatever. Point is, you got reason to hate these red devils same as the rest of us." Samuel looked again at the Apache boy. The youngster's eyes met his across the crowd, and in that moment, Samuel saw something that shook him to his core. The boy wasn't just accepting death with dignity, he was protecting someone. His eyes kept darting toward the hills, worry creasing his young features. Someone was out there, someone he cared about, and this boy had gotten himself caught to ensure they stayed free. "What exactly did he steal?" Samuel asked, setting down his supplies and walking closer. 3 head of cattle from Peterson's north pasture," Morrison replied, gesturing to a pot-bellied man in the crowd who nodded vigorously. "You see him steal them, Peterson?" The rancher shifted uncomfortably. "Well, no, not exactly, but we found him near where they went missing, and everyone knows Indians are thieves." Samuel studied the boy more carefully. His ribs showed through his torn shirt, and his moccasins were worn nearly through. This wasn't a boy who had been eating stolen beef. This was a boy who was starving. "You speak English, son?" Samuel asked gently. The boy's jaw tightened, but after a moment, he nodded once. "What's your name?" "Ayana's brother," the boy replied in heavily accented English, his voice barely above a whisper. Samuel felt his heart clench. The boy hadn't even given his own name, just identified himself as someone's protector. Where is Ayana now? The boy's eyes flashed with fierce protectiveness, and he pressed his lips together, refusing to answer. Don't matter what his name is, Morrison interrupted impatiently. Going to be a dead Indian in 5 minutes either way. He turned to address the crowd. String up a rope. Time to show these savages what happens when they steal from decent white folks. The crowd roared its approval, and several men began moving toward the old oak tree at the edge of town. Samuel watched in growing horror as they threw a rope over the strongest branch and fashioned a noose. The boy remained stoic, but Samuel could see the slight tremor in his bound hands. "Wait!" Samuel called out, his voice cutting through the noise. The crowd turned toward him, expectant. "This doesn't sit right with me." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean, Crawford?" Samuel took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would change everything. "Look at him, Morrison. Really look at him. He's skin and bones. When's the last time any of you saw cattle thieves who were starving? If he'd stolen 3 head of beef, don't you think he'd have eaten some of it?" "Indians are naturally thin," Peterson called out. "Doesn't prove nothing." "And look at his feet," Samuel continued, pointing to the boy's worn moccasins. "Those shoes have walked a long way. He didn't come here to steal cattle. He came here looking for food, maybe begging for it." The crowd's enthusiasm wavered slightly, but Morrison stepped forward aggressively. "You calling me a liar, Crawford?" "I'm calling you hasty," Samuel replied, his hand moving instinctively toward his own sidearm. "Hanging a boy on circumstantial evidence isn't justice. It's murder." The tension in the street became palpable. Women pulled their children closer, and men shifted nervously, hands moving toward weapons. Everyone knew Samuel Crawford's reputation with a gun from his army days. "You defending Indians now, Crawford?" Morrison's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "After what they'd done to families in this territory." Samuel looked once more at the boy, who was watching the exchange with growing amazement. No one had ever stood up for him before. That much was clear from his expression. "I'm defending justice," Samuel said firmly, "and justice says a man or boy deserves a fair trial, not a lynch mob." Morrison's hand closed on his pistol grip. "Step aside, Crawford. This isn't your fight." Samuel didn't move. Instead, he walked slowly toward the boy, placing himself directly between the Apache youth and the hostile crowd. "I'm making it my fight." The street erupted in angry shouts and threats, but Samuel stood his ground, one weathered rancher facing down an entire town's bloodlust. The boy behind him whispered something in Apache, perhaps a prayer, perhaps words of gratitude he'd never expected to need. In that moment, Samuel Crawford made a choice that would echo across the desert for generations to come. The standoff stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Samuel could feel the Apache boy's rapid breathing behind him, could sense the crowd's growing agitation as their afternoon entertainment was being denied. Captain Morrison's face had turned an ugly shade of red, his military bearing cracking under the public challenge to his authority. "You're making a mistake, Crawford," Morrison hissed, his hand still hovering over his weapon. "This town won't forget who stood with the Indians." "Neither will I," Samuel replied evenly, his own gun still holstered but ready. He'd seen enough men die to know when violence was about to explode, and the signs were all here. The shifting feet, the nervous licking of lips, the way conversations had dropped to whispers. From somewhere in the crowd, a woman's voice called out, "Sam's lost his mind. The heat's gotten to him." It was Martha Henley, the banker's wife, her face twisted with disgust. But then another voice spoke up, unexpected and clear. "Wait." Old Doc Matthews pushed through the crowd, his medical bag in hand and his white beard bristling with authority. At 72, he was one of the few men in Copper Ridge who remembered when this land belonged to no one but the wind and the wolves. "What's this about, Doc?" Morrison demanded, clearly irritated by another interruption. "About doing things right," Matthews replied, approaching the boy with professional calm. "If we're going to accuse this child of rustling, least we can do is examine the evidence properly." The doctor knelt beside the Apache boy, who tensed but didn't pull away. Matthews gently examined his hands, his arms, his clothes. The crowd watched in fascination as the old physician worked. "These hands haven't handled rope in weeks," Matthews announced, standing and brushing dust from his knees. "No rope burns, no calluses from recent cattle work. And look here," He pointed to the boy's torn shirt. "These tears are from thorns, not barbed wire. This child's been traveling through the desert, not working around a ranch." "So what?" Peterson called out defensively. "Don't prove he didn't steal my cattle." "Actually, it does," came another unexpected voice. Sarah Chen stepped forward from the crowd, the Chinese woman who ran the general store with her husband. Her English carried a slight accent, but her words were precise and clear. "This boy came to my store 3 days ago." The crowd fell silent. Sarah Chen rarely spoke at public gatherings, keeping to herself and her business. For her to speak now meant something significant. "He came asking for work," she continued, her dark eyes steady on Morrison's face. "He offered to sweep floors, carry supplies, anything for food. My husband gave him a biscuit and told him to move on. The boy thanked us in English and walked toward the hills. He never asked about cattle, never went toward Peterson's ranch." Peterson's face was growing redder by the minute. "You're lying to protect him." "Why would I lie?" Sarah asked simply. "I have nothing to gain by protecting an Apache boy, but I have something to lose by staying silent when an innocent child is about to be murdered." Samuel felt a surge of gratitude toward the Chinese woman. He'd always respected her quiet dignity, but now he saw the steel beneath her gentle manner. "This is all very touching," Morrison snarled, "but it doesn't change the fact that cattle are missing and this Indian was found in the area. Sometimes frontier justice has to move fast." "Then let's move fast toward the truth," Samuel suggested. He turned to Peterson. "When exactly did you discover the cattle were missing?" "Yesterday morning," Peterson replied reluctantly. "And when was this boy captured?" Morrison answered this time. "My patrol found him yesterday afternoon, about 5 miles south of Peterson's place." Samuel nodded slowly. 5 miles south. That's a long way from where the cattle disappeared, and Doc just proved he hasn't been handling cattle recently. He paused, letting the logic sink in. "Seems to me you might want to look for your real cattle thieves instead of lynching an innocent boy." The crowd began to murmur among themselves, doubt creeping into their bloodthirsty certainty. Samuel could see Morrison realizing that his easy afternoon execution was slipping away. "I don't have time for this," the captain declared. "Orders are orders. Any Indian found in the vicinity of missing livestock is to be dealt with summarily." "Whose orders?" Samuel asked sharply. Morrison's hesitation lasted only a second, but it was enough. "Colonel Hamilton's standing orders for the territory." "I served under Hamilton in the war," Samuel said quietly. "He never gave orders to execute children without trial." "You're lying, Morrison." The accusation hung in the desert air like gunpowder smoke. Morrison's face went through several shades of anger before settling on cold fury. "Are you calling me a liar twice in one day, Crawford?" "I'm calling you wrong," Samuel replied, "and I'm not moving until this boy gets a fair hearing." Behind him, the Apache boy spoke softly in his own language. Samuel didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable, gratitude mixed with amazement that a white man would risk so much for a stranger. "What's he saying?" Morrison demanded. Sarah Chen answered unexpectedly. "He's thanking Mr. Crawford for his kindness. He's also saying goodbye because he believes he's going to die anyway." The words hit Samuel like a punch to the gut. This boy had so little hope, so little experience with mercy, that even this intervention seemed temporary to him. "Tell him," Samuel said to Sarah, "that as long as I'm breathing, he's under my protection." Sarah spoke rapidly, in what sounded like a mixture of Apache and Spanish. The boy's eyes widened, and he looked at Samuel with something approaching wonder. "This is insane," Morrison exploded. "Crawford, you're interfering with military justice." "Then court-martial me," Samuel shot back. "But you're not hanging this boy today." The crowd was becoming restless again, but now the restlessness seemed different, less unified, more uncertain. Doubt was a powerful thing, and once it took root, it was hard to ignore. That's when young Billy Henderson came running down the street, his face flushed with excitement and exertion. "Mr. Peterson," he called out, pushing through the crowd. "Mr. Peterson, sir." "What is it, boy?" Peterson asked impatiently. "Found your cattle, sir. All 3 of them. They broke through the fence on the south side and wandered into Miller's Valley. Got themselves stuck in that box canyon about 10 miles east of here. Took us all morning to get them out." The silence that followed was deafening. Peterson's face went from red to white to green in the space of seconds. The crowd began looking at each other uncomfortably, realizing how close they'd come to hanging an innocent child. Morrison's hand dropped away from his weapon, but his eyes remained fixed on Samuel with undisguised hatred. "This isn't over, Crawford." "Yes, it is," Samuel replied firmly. He turned to face the crowd. "This boy came here hungry and desperate, looking for honest work. Instead of helping him, you were ready to murder him for a crime that never happened. Maybe it's time we all took a long look at what we've become." He walked to the boy and began untying his bonds. The rope fell away, and the Apache youth rubbed his wrists, still staring at Samuel with disbelief. "What's your real name, son?" Samuel asked gently. The boy hesitated, then spoke clearly. "Nalnish. It means, he works hard." Samuel nodded. "Well, Nalnish, you're free to go. But if you're still looking for honest work, my ranch can always use an extra pair of hands." The offer hung in the air like a bridge between two worlds, and everyone present knew they were witnessing something that would be remembered long after they were all dust. Nalnish didn't leave immediately. Instead, he stood in the middle of Copper Ridge's main street, studying Samuel Crawford, with eyes that seemed far older than his 14 years. The crowd had begun to disperse, muttering among themselves about the morning's events, but the tension remained thick as desert heat. "Why?" Nalnish asked simply, his English carefully pronounced. Samuel understood the question went deeper than words. Why risk everything for a stranger? Why stand against an entire town? Why offer sanctuary to someone his own people considered an enemy? "Because it was right," Samuel answered. And in those 4 words, both man and boy understood that something profound had shifted in the fabric of their world. Captain Morrison hadn't left with his men. He lingered at the edge of the crowd, his face dark with humiliation and rage. Samuel caught his eye and saw something there that made his blood run cold. This wasn't over. Morrison was a career soldier who'd built his reputation on being feared by both Indians and settlers alike. Today's public embarrassment would demand retribution. "I'll take that job," Nalnish said quietly, bringing Samuel's attention back to the present. "Good. My ranch is about 5 miles north of town. But first," Samuel glanced around at the hostile faces still watching from doorways and windows. "First, we need to get you fed and cleaned up. Sarah, you still got those biscuits?" Sarah Chen nodded and disappeared into her store, returning with a cloth bundle. "Biscuits, jerky, and dried fruit. It's not much, but it'll help." As Nalnish accepted the food with grave politeness, Samuel noticed how the boy's hands shook slightly. Not from fear, from hunger so deep it had become part of him. How long had he been surviving on roots and whatever small game he could catch? "There's a water trough behind the store," Samuel said. "Get yourself cleaned up while I finish loading my supplies, then we'll head to the ranch." As Nalnish walked away, Sarah Chen stepped closer to Samuel. "You've made enemies today," she said quietly. "Had them before," Samuel replied, but he appreciated the warning. Morrison's type doesn't forget being shown up in public. "It's not just Morrison you need to worry about." Sarah's voice dropped even lower. "There's been talk some of the ranchers think the Apache are getting too bold, coming this close to town. They've been meeting, planning some kind of action." Samuel felt ice in his veins despite the desert heat. "What kind of action?" "The kind that ends with dead Indians and burned villages," Sarah said bluntly. "Peterson's been the loudest voice, especially after his cattle went missing. Today's events, they won't make him any more reasonable." Before Samuel could respond, Nalnish returned, his face clean and his hair wet from the trough. The boy looked slightly more human now, though the hollow hunger in his eyes remained. "Ready?" Samuel asked. Nalnish nodded, but as they prepared to leave, he spoke again. "My people, they will wonder what happened to me. If I don't return." "How many are out there?" Samuel asked gently. The boy's loyalty to his family warred with his gratitude to Samuel. Finally, he said, "My sister, my grandmother, 3 others. We came south looking for food. The reservation has nothing. People are dying." Samuel's heart clenched. 6 Apache, including an old woman and a young girl, surviving on the desert's mercy. No wonder this boy had risked everything to find food. "Where are they camped?" Nalnish hesitated, then pointed toward the hills. 2 days' walk. Hidden place with water. "They'll be worried about you." "Yes, but if I go back now, my sister will want to keep moving. She doesn't trust your people. After today, maybe she's right." Samuel made a decision that would echo across the desert for generations. "What if I went with you, met them, explained what happened? Maybe convince them to come closer to my ranch where they'd be safer. Nalnish stared at him as if he'd spoken in tongues. You would do this? Come alone into Apache country to speak with my family? Not Apache country, Samuel corrected gently. Just country. This land belongs to whoever needs it most. The boy's eyes filled with tears he was too proud to shed. In his short life, he'd learned that white men's words were often lies wrapped in promises, but something in Samuel's steady gaze told him this man was different. My grandmother, she speaks some English. She remembers when there was peace between our peoples. But my sister, Nalnish shook his head. Ayana has seen too much death. She trusts no white man. Then we'll have to earn her trust, Samuel said simply. As they climbed into Samuel's wagon, neither man noticed the figure watching from the shadows of the saloon. Captain Morrison stood motionless, his mind already working on plans that would restore his damaged reputation. If Crawford wanted to play protector to the Indians, then Morrison would make sure it cost him everything. The wagon rolled north out of Copper Ridge, carrying a rancher and an Apache boy toward a meeting that would change the destiny of everyone in the territory. Behind them, the town buzzed with excited conversations about the morning's drama. Most folks figured the excitement was over, that life would return to normal now that the crisis had passed. They couldn't have been more wrong. As the sun climbed higher, painting the desert in shades of gold and red, other eyes watched the wagon's progress. From hidden positions in the rocks and scrub, Apache scouts tracked the unlikely pair. Word would reach Ayana long before her brother returned, and she would have to decide whether this strange turn of events represented hope or a trap more subtle than any they'd encountered before. Meanwhile, in Copper Ridge, Peterson was calling another meeting. The ranchers who gathered in the back room of Murphy's saloon were angry, embarrassed, and looking for someone to blame. Crawford's interference had robbed them of their righteous vengeance, but more importantly, it had made them look like fools in front of their wives and children. Something's got to be done, Peterson declared, his face still mottled with shame. Crawford's gone Indian lover on us, and that's dangerous for everyone in this valley. The men nodded agreement, their voices rising as they fed off each other's anger. None of them noticed Captain Morrison slip quietly into the saloon's back entrance, his ears sharp for every word of their planning. By the time the sun set that evening, 3 separate groups were making plans that would collide like summer storms over the desert. Samuel Crawford and Nalnish rode toward a family of desperate Apache, hoping to build a bridge between 2 worlds. Ayana and her small band prepared for what might be their last stand, torn between hope and the hard-learned wisdom of survival. And in Copper Ridge, men with guns and grievances plotted actions they believed would restore the natural order of things. None of them realized that by morning, the entire territory would be holding its breath, waiting to see which force would prove stronger: hatred or hope, fear or courage, the weight of the past or the possibility of a different future. The desert wind carried the scent of change, and somewhere in the distance drums began to beat. Samuel Crawford woke to the sound of approaching horses, many horses. The pre-dawn darkness was broken by the soft thunder of hoofbeats, and his experienced ear told him this wasn't a small patrol or a group of travelers. This was an army. He rolled from his blanket and reached for his rifle, but Nalnish was already awake, sitting perfectly still beside the dying embers of their campfire. The boy's face was serene, almost peaceful, as if he'd been expecting this moment. "How many?" Samuel whispered. 300, Nalnish replied calmly. "Maybe more." Samuel's blood ran cold. 300 Apache warriors could wipe out every settlement between here and Tucson. If they were coming for revenge over yesterday's near lynching, the entire territory was about to become a battlefield. "Are they here to kill me?" Samuel asked, surprised by his own calm. Nalnish smiled, the first genuine smile Samuel had seen from the boy. "No, Mr. Crawford, they're here to honor you." Before Samuel could ask what that meant, the riders appeared over the ridge like a vision from another age. They came in perfect silence, except for the whisper of hooves on sand. 300 Apache warriors on painted ponies, their faces serious, but not hostile. At their head rode a woman Samuel immediately recognized as Ayana, Nalnish's sister. She was perhaps 25, with long black hair braided with feathers and silver, and eyes that held both ancient wisdom and terrible grief. She wore traditional Apache clothing, but carried a Winchester rifle with the easy familiarity of someone who'd been fighting for her life since childhood. The massive war party spread out in a perfect semicircle around Samuel's small camp, but made no aggressive moves. Instead, they waited in absolute silence as Ayana dismounted and walked forward alone. "You are the man who protected my brother," she said in clear English, her voice carrying across the desert stillness. "I am," Samuel replied, setting down his rifle but remaining ready. "And you're Ayana?" She nodded once. "Tell me why." It was the same question Nalnish had asked, but coming from this formidable woman with 300 warriors at her back, it carried far more weight. "Because it was right," Samuel said simply. Ayana studied him for a long moment, then spoke rapidly in Apache. Nalnish responded, and Samuel caught his own name several times in their exchange. Finally, she turned back to him. "My brother tells me you offered to employ him, to treat him as family rather than servant." "That's right. He also tells me you offered to protect our people, to help us find safety." Samuel nodded, acutely aware that one wrong word could turn this peaceful meeting into a massacre. "I did. Why would you do this? Your people and mine have been enemies since before you were born." Samuel thought of his son, buried in the little cemetery behind his ranch. He thought of his wife taken by fever. He thought of all the senseless death he'd seen in war and in peace, and finally spoke from the deepest part of his heart. "Because being enemies hasn't made either of us safer or happier. Maybe it's time to try something different." Ayana's eyes never left his face as she translated for her warriors. The response was a low murmur of voices, neither approving nor disapproving, but definitely interested. "You know that yesterday, while you were protecting my brother, your town was planning war against us?" Samuel felt his stomach drop. "What kind of war?" "The kind where they come with torches in the night and kill everyone they find, including children and grandmothers." Ayana's voice remained steady, but Samuel could see the pain beneath her composure. "We have scouts everywhere, Mr. Crawford. We know about Peterson's meetings. We know about Captain Morrison's orders to his men. They're planning to attack your camp. Tonight," Nalnish said quietly. "That's why Ayana came, to decide whether to run or fight." The magnitude of what was unfolding hit Samuel like a physical blow. While he'd been congratulating himself on saving one Apache boy, the entire territory was about to explode into violence that would leave hundreds dead. 300 warriors, Samuel said slowly. "If you wanted revenge for yesterday, for all the wrongs done to your people, you could take it." Ayana nodded. "We could burn every ranch, every town, drive every white settler back across the mountains. The thought has appeal, but you haven't. Not yet." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Tell me, Samuel Crawford, what would you do if someone threatened to murder your family while they slept?" The question hung between them like a blade. Samuel knew she was testing him, not just as a man, but as a representative of his entire race. "I'd protect them," he said, without hesitation, "any way I had to, even if it meant killing innocent people who happened to be the same color as your enemies." Samuel met her gaze steadily. "No, never that." For the first time, Ayana smiled, and her face transformed from intimidating to beautiful. "That, Mr. Crawford, is why you're still alive to have this conversation." She turned and spoke to her warriors in Apache, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of command. Several men dismounted and began unpacking what looked like ceremonial items from their saddlebags. "What's happening?" Samuel asked Nalnish. "My sister is calling a council. She wants to hear your proposal for ending this before it begins." "I don't have a proposal," Samuel admitted. "I was just trying to do right by one boy." "Sometimes," Ayana said, overhearing, "that's how the biggest changes begin, with one person doing right by one other person." As the sun rose over the desert, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, the most unusual negotiation in the history of the Arizona Territory began. On one side sat Samuel Crawford, a widowed rancher who'd risked everything for a stranger's child. On the other sat Ayana, war leader of 300 Apache warriors who had every reason to hate his people. Between them lay the possibility of either the bloodiest conflict the territory had ever seen or something unprecedented, a peace built on mutual respect rather than military dominance. As they talked, neither side noticed the dust cloud approaching from the south. Captain Morrison, leading 50 cavalry soldiers and twice as many armed civilians, was riding hard toward what he believed would be the capture or killing of a small band of Apache refugees. Instead, he was about to encounter 300 seasoned warriors, led by a woman who had been preparing for this moment her entire life. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of Copper Ridge and the surrounding settlements, but the future relationship between two peoples who had been enemies for so long they'd almost forgotten how to be anything else. In the growing morning light, Samuel Crawford, a simple rancher who just wanted to do the right thing, found himself at the center of history, with the lives of thousands hanging in the balance of the next few hours. The desert held its breath, waiting to see whether wisdom or violence would win the day. This story demonstrates how a single act of conscience can ripple outward to change the world. Samuel Crawford's decision to protect an innocent boy didn't just save one life. It opened the door to a new understanding between peoples who had been trapped in cycles of violence and mistrust. Sometimes the most powerful force in the world is one person willing to do what's right regardless of the cost.